Going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so we'll start. And first, we're going to talk about the line of combat contacts and about the Zaporizke direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation from two directions, from the southwest and from the east. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the city by the name of Stepnogorsk. The Russians managed to break through completely Ukrainian defense in the village by the name of Plavny, to cross some water barriers and to enter the western part of the city of Stepnogorsk. We came to this conclusion based on the video published by pro-Ukrainian resources. In this video, we can see how exactly the Russians were moving and what kind of buildings the Russians captured. Later, when the Ukrainians discovered positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation, they began bombing them with aviation. So several positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation were destroyed, but we have no records that confirm Ukraine control over this territory. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map. The territory in this area looked like this yesterday by the end of the 24th of August of 2025, and by the morning of the 26th of August, we colored the territory as is. Furthermore, we believe that in coming hours, the Russians will finish the battle for the settlement of Plavny, and most likely the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. We will adjust this territory completely. So as you can see, the Russians answered the settlement of Stepnogorsk from many directions, and it seems that the battle for the village is going to start in coming days or maybe even hours. Now let's move further. As for the eastern flank of the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians also continue their major offensive operation that was announced by Syrskyi several weeks ago. Today, the Group of Forces East published another video, this time from the settlement by the name of Zaporizke, and in this video we can see how the Russians were fighting for the territory. During this video, we can see lots of artillery strikes, lots of aviation strikes, lots of explosions, and as well a lot of damage that was dealt to the armored force of Ukraine. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map because in the final part of this video, we can see how Russians raised their flag in the most northern part of the settlement, which means that the Russians have strong control over the territory and that Ukrainians were forced to fall back from this area. Once again, based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor completely. So this is the situation by the end of the 25th, by the beginning of the 25th of August, and this is the situation by the end of the 24th of August. The Russians improved their position significantly, and now we see that the Russians are moving further. The next target for the Russians are the villages of Obratne, the village of Novomikhailivka, and of course the village of Kamyshevacha. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for this territory. At the same time, we still continue receiving reports and updates from the western flank of the Donetsk region, from the area between the villages of Andreevka, Klivtsovo, Zelený Gai, and Tolstoy. Currently, one thing is clear, that there are very heavy clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Currently, the Russians able to regroup themselves, and now the Russians launch a serious number of counterattacks with the purpose to force Ukrainians to fall back. So based on the reports that were published by different mappers, by neutral mappers, by pro-Russian resources and by pro-Western resources, the entire territory, lots of territories between the villages of Andreevka, Klivtsovo, Zelený Gai, and Tolstoy were colored as a gray zone or contested area, because according to many sources, these territories are not under complete control of any of the sides, neither under control of the Russian forces nor under control of the armored forces of Ukraine. So that is why we added this contested area and the growth zone. The clashes in this area continues, but the most important is that the Russians managed to introduce additional forces in this area which were able to stabilize the situation. Now the Russians are counter-attacking with the purpose to restore control over the lost territories. At the same time, the armored forces of the Russian Federation continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Novopavlovka. If you remember, yesterday in the evening, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the Group of Forces Center managed to establish complete control over the village by the name of Filia. So this is the settlement that is located on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha. So for example, this is the situation by the end of the 23rd of August of 2025. By the end of the 24th of August, we colored this territory based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. And by the morning of the 25th of August, we got additional video published by pro-Russian resources where we can see how exactly the battle for the settlement of Filia was taking place. In this video, we can see how Russians crossed the river of Volcha using different equipment, how they were crossing this. Then we can see how Russians were entering the village of Filia from many directions. And of course, in the final part of this video, we can see how Russians raised their flag in the central part of the village, which confirms Russian control over the territory. Now the Ukrainians are trying to regroup themselves and to bring additional forces to the forest, which is located to the north of the village of Filia, to the south of the village of Novopavlovka. The Ukrainians are trying to concentrate themselves in this direction, probably with the purpose to carry out counter-offensive operation and to restore control of the village. But the Russians see the movements of the armored forces of Ukraine, so that is why the Russians are bombing this territory with FABs. Lots of explosions were recorded. Most likely Ukrainians suffered huge losses. The main purpose of these Russian attacks is to ruin Ukrainian plans to carry out counter-offensive operation. The village of Filia is very important, and this is another village in the Dnipro direction and in the Dnipro region. Based on the village of Filia, the Russians will be able to continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Novopavlovka, which is a key settlement in the entire Dnipropetrovsk direction. If Russians establish complete control over the village of Novopavlovka, this will allow the Russians to begin concentration of their forces before moving further deep inside of the Dnipro region, which most likely is going to take place obviously during the even 2025. Now let's move further. As for the Pokrovsk direction, during the previous night, we haven't received anything special. The same story, almost the same story, concerns the city and the Konstantinovka direction. We have small changes on the ground that were recorded by different neutral mappers. According to them, the Russians continue advancing in the residential area of the city of Konstantinovka in its southeastern part during the previous 24 hours, and during the previous nights, additional changes were recorded. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 24th of August. This is the situation by the morning of the 25th of August. As we can see, the Russians improved their positions significantly and the Russians continue advancing. So this residential area is the first task of the armored force of the Russian Federation on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk. Based on this residential area, the Russians will move further in the western direction with the purpose to begin clashes and fightings for the central part of the city. So the assault of the city of Konstantinovka has begun. Currently, nobody has any doubts about this. Now let's talk about the Liman direction. The situation is very difficult. The situation in the Liman-Siversky direction is very complicated. There is no line of defense in the standard sense. The Russian armored forces are entering the rear in groups and setting up positions. There are positions of Ukrainian forces that have been surrounded for several days. So the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians control and the Russians have complete initiative in this direction. The Russians are advancing from many areas and Ukrainians suffer huge losses, first of all, due to shortage of manpower. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. To the west of the settlement of Kolodisi, the neutral mappers reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this complex, over this stronghold, and we see that the Russians continue advancing further in the direction of the village of Stavki. At the same time, during the previous 24 hours, very interesting events were recorded in the vicinity of the settlement of Novomikhailivka. And this is the first video that was published by the Russian resources. Here we can see how another Ukrainian vehicle was damaged and destroyed on its way towards the settlement of Novomikhailivka. The vehicle was most likely damaged and destroyed by Russian FPV drone. And here we can see just the consequences of this attack. This episode was geolocated exactly in this point, and based on this video we came to the conclusion that most likely this company's stronghold is under complete Ukrainian control. But later, the General Staff of Ukraine reported that as a result of counterattack, the third Assault Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine managed to restore complete control over the settlement by the name of Novomikhailivka. A bit later, pro-Russian resources published the video of how exactly the Ukrainians were counterattacking and how exactly the Russians were FPV droning Ukrainian units. As for now, we have this video that confirms that Ukrainians answered the village of Novomikhailivka and were trying to establish complete control over the territory, but at the same time we have video from the Russian side where we can see how Russians were attacking Ukrainian vehicles and that Ukrainians were suffering huge losses. The pro-Russian resource reported that as a result of clashes for this territory, Ukrainians lost up to 20 soldiers and several armored vehicles. So as for now, we are waiting for additional geolocations, and we will add both videos from pro-Russian side and from pro-Ukrainian side to map, and then we will adjust the map accordingly. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Kupiansk. According to most of the sources, both pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, and neutral mappers, the situation that you can see right now in front of your screens in the vicinity of the city of Kupiansk currently doesn't correspond with the reality. So the map is much, let's say, favorable in Russia, much favorable for Russians, and according to different mappers, the city of Kupiansk were already caught by the Russians in cauldron or even caught in operational encirclement. Let's discuss articles we have. So this is the map that was provided by different pro-Russian but very reliable resources. According to them, the Russians are advancing to the south of the settlement of Sobolevka, and during the previous days, weeks managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians are saying that currently there are several tasks for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The first one is to continue offensive operation in the southeastern direction with the purpose to attack different micro-districts of the city of Kupiansk and its outskirts from the west and from the southwest. Furthermore, the sources are saying that the Russians are advancing in the direction of the settlement of Blagodatovka. And furthermore, the same source published this video where we can see how several Russian soldiers were clearing the trenches and strongholds in this forest. So this video wasn't geolocated and we added this video softly, but the pro-Russian resource is saying that this is exactly the place where this video took place. Here we can see once again several Russian soldiers that were clearing trenches and fortifications of the armed forces of Ukraine. So, summarizing everything that was published by pro-Russian resources, currently the situation in the Kupiansk direction looks like this. So, the Russians control almost everything, or probably even everything, along this red line, which means that the city of Kupiansk was already caught by the Russians in cauldron. Currently, the Ukrainians have just several supply lines that goes through the village of Osinova and Pristin, but all these lines under complete Russian FPV drone control. Furthermore, the most important, we got video from the most northwestern part of the city of Kupiansk. This is the video I'm talking about. Here we can see how Ukrainians were counterattacking Russians already on the territory of the city. Lots of episodes how Ukrainians landed in the area, how Ukrainians were clearing one building after another, and here we can see lots of episodes how Ukrainian FPV drones were bombing and attacking different buildings and constructions on the territory of the northwestern part of the city. So several episodes were geolocated in these points in this area, and based on this video we adjusted the map. So according to these adjustments, the Russians currently trying to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol, and the Russians are getting in the southern direction. It seems that the city of Kupiansk and the entire northern Kupiansk direction is about to collapse completely, and the Russians are about to seize complete control over this territory. The situation for Ukrainians here is very difficult, and it seems that Ukrainians are about to begin retreat from this direction without any chances to save control over the city of Kupiansk and its agglomeration. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.